Welcome to Unspoken Affairs. It was an ordinary Thursday morning, the kind where nothing unusual seemed likely to happen. The kind of day that begins with the predictable rhythm of routine, the little sounds of home that fade into the background. When life feels steady, the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the slow, steady tick of the wall clock, the faint noise of cars rushing past on the street outside. Mom had packed her overnight bag the night before. She always did it that. Way organized, prepared, never one to scramble at the last minute. I watched her moving about the kitchen that morning, double-checking her list, slipping her laptop into its case, and then calling out a quick reminder about groceries before she left. She was calm, collected, and focused, like always. And when she finally rolled her suitcase to the front door, the sound of its wheels clattering softly against the floor tiles seemed almost too loud in the quiet morning. I stood by the window as she walked out. I watched her climb into the car and pull away, the taillights shrinking as she disappeared around the corner. And though I told myself it was nothing unusual, she traveled for work all the time. I felt a strange emptiness open in my stomach. Dad stood at the doorway, watching her, too. He waved as if it were the most natural thing in the world, but there was something about the way he did it that unsettled me. His smile felt just a little too perfect, almost rehearsed, as though he'd practiced it in a mirror and was making sure to hold it long enough for her to see. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing I could point to, but something about his calm seemed forced. For as long as I could remember, our home had been built on a delicate balance of routines. We were never the perfect family, but we weren't broken either. There was laughter at dinner, occasional arguments that flared up but burned out just as quickly, and a rhythm to our days that kept things moving. Mom's business trips were simply part of that rhythm. She traveled often, and Dad and I had grown used to the days that unfolded in her absence, quiet meals, a house that felt a little emptier, conversations that were simple, almost filler to pass the time. But that morning, from the moment the door closed behind her, something felt different. I tried to dismiss the thought at first. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was imagining things. But the feeling lingered. It followed me into the kitchen as I poured cereal into a bowl. It stayed with me as the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. And it deepened when I noticed how Dad kept glancing at me from behind the newspaper he was pretending to read. His eyes would flick up for just a moment, sharp and focused, before darting back down as if he hadn't been caught. I told myself I was overthinking, but then I noticed the way he ran his hand nervously through his hair. The way he fiddled with his phone, quickly locking it whenever I happened to glance over. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the kitchen walls, and for a moment I felt as though the house itself had shifted. The warmth was there, the familiarity too, but beneath it was a subtle tension, like the quiet air before a thunderstorm. As the morning stretched on, little things began to stand out. A half-empty cup of coffee left on the counter, still steaming. His phone buzzing against the table, only for him to snatch it up quickly, muting the screen before I could see who it was. And the way he lingered near doorways, as though waiting to be noticed. It wasn't like him. Dad was usually relaxed, casual, easygoing. But now, his movements were deliberate, calculated, as though every gesture had a hidden meaning. I tried to distract myself. I scrolled through my phone. I cleaned up the living room. I even put on music just to fill the silence. But no matter what I did, I felt his eyes on me, watching. Measuring dot at lunch. He was strangely talkative. "Do you ever feel like people don't tell you everything?" he asked suddenly, spoon hovering in midair above his bowl. The question caught me off guard. I looked up, trying to play it cool, and shrugged. "Sometimes," I said, but the way he looked at me, steady, unblinking, sent a chill down my spine. I laughed lightly, trying to brush it off. But something about that look stayed with me long after. The rest of the day only grew stranger. He would leave the room suddenly, returning with odd explanations that didn't quite add up. His phone seemed glued to his hand, yet he avoided answering calls near me. I noticed a drawer in his study left slightly open, odd, since he was normally meticulous about keeping things tidy. By the afternoon, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The tension in the house was undeniable. I sat in the living room, pretending to read a book, when he walked in with a fresh cup of tea. He set it down carefully and said in an almost casual tone, "People can't always resist temptation." I froze. The words hung in the air between us. He smiled faintly, as though it was just a throwaway comment, but the weight of it pressed heavily on my chest. Temptation, secrets, his strange behavior all day. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger beneath the surface. As evening fell, the house seemed quieter than ever. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked. The distant sound of traffic outside grew softer as the sky darkened. But inside, the silence felt thick, heavy. I tried to read, but my mind kept circling back to the little things I'd noticed all day: the quick glances, the guarded phone, the cryptic remarks. Something was wrong. When Dad left his study for a moment, I found myself standing by the door. It was slightly open, and the faint glow of the computer screen illuminated the room. I hesitated, telling myself it was none of my business, that I should turn around. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of coffee and his cologne. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, but a notebook sat slightly out of place, as though it had been moved in a hurry. My heart pounded. I reached for it. At first, seemed normal. Grocery lists, work notes, reminders. But as I flipped through the pages, my eyes caught on something else. Names, dates, places that didn't make sense. And then, tucked between two pages, a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably his. The words were casual, almost businesslike, but the meaning was unmistakable. It wasn't about work. It wasn't about errands. It was about her, a woman. Someone who wasn't Mom. My breath caught. The room tilted slightly as the truth sank in. Dad was having an affair. The signs I'd been picking up on all day suddenly made sense. The secrecy, the phone, the tension. The strange remarks. I sank into the chair, the paper trembling in my hands. I wanted to tell myself I was wrong, that I had misunderstood, but deep down I knew I hadn't. The words were too clear. The meeting's too specific. Shock gave way to anger, then sadness, then something heavier. Betrayal. This was my father, the man I trusted, the man I believed had built this family on honesty and love. And now, staring at the evidence, I realized that image had been shattered. When I finally put the notebook down, my hands were shaking. The house felt different now, darker, as though the walls themselves knew what I had discovered. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't unsee what I had read. Later that evening, I walked back into the living room. Dad sat there quietly, a book in his hands. "Dad," I said softly, holding up the notebook. I saw it. He looked up slowly, his eyes flickering with recognition before settling into a calm, almost weary expression. He didn't shout, he didn't deny it. He simply set his book aside and leaned back, studying me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. The silence between us was suffocating. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, steady. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said. "But yes, I made mistakes. Things I regret." The words hung heavy in the air. I didn't know what to say. Anger, disappointment, confusion, they all collided inside me. I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, demand explanations. But another part of me, the part still clinging to the image of who I thought he was, couldn't bring myself to say a word. The father I thought I knew, the man who waved Mom off so casually that morning, had been carrying a secret that could destroy everything. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something important. The truth doesn't always arrive with a crash. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, hidden in glances, in half-spoken words. in the tension of an ordinary day that suddenly feels anything but ordinary. And once you see it, once you uncover what was meant to stay hidden, nothing is ever the same again. Because secrets, no matter how carefully they're buried, always find a way to the surface. And when they do, they leave marks that never fade.